what type of innovation exists to close the gap so that you can continue to have properties and characteristics around security and privacy without sacrificing performance, essentially. So ZK is an innovation that allows tremendous resilience, tremendous security, tremendous privacy, and it can potentially enhance performance significantly. And in the context of identity, what if you could establish your identity on chain and now you have a canonical identity, and from that canonical identity, you have persona constructs that describe who you are in different contexts. And so you can have attestations from others that describe your gamer persona without revealing all this other information.
Welcome to another episode of the Untangling Web3 podcast. Today we're joined by John Lilic on the show. John is a veteran of the Web3 space, having been involved in the Bitcoin Center NYC amongst the very first employees at Consensus, and is now a top 50 Web3 angel investor. Following his recent appointment as executive director at the Telos Foundation, John joins us today to discuss the importance of zero-knowledge technologies in Web3. John, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. It's wonderful to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Hey, John. Yeah, how are you doing today? You just told us before we got you on that you're in the Philippines. That sounds exciting. I can see you've got a kind of a maybe a more tropical t-shirt on to make the most of the weather out there. But how are you doing?
Oh, it's like 30 degrees Celsius. I'm sending messages to all my friends in North America and Europe right now. It's a wonderful part of the world. The weather is incredible during the wintertime, and Telos is kicking off an Asia road tour. So actually, when you look at the map, the Philippines is in the center of Asia. It's like an hour-and-a-half flight from Hong Kong. You can get pretty much anywhere in a couple hours. So we're going to be doing lots and lots of events throughout the region, and very fortunate to be kicking off here in Manila at the moment.
I mean, we've kind of talked about it on the show before that the Philippines is an incredibly interesting country in terms of like crypto adoption, NFT adoption, global remittances. It's kind of a prime candidate for a lot of the things we tend to talk about in Web3. But we're not here to talk about the Philippines. We're here to talk about you, John. So yeah, Jack gave us a little bit of an intro into you. But can you tell us a little bit about your early career?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I got into Bitcoin by just extreme dumb luck. I happened to be living in London at the time. We were chatting off screen before the podcast started. I was living in a basement apartment in Camden across the street from the Sainsbury's, and I was doing e-commerce. I was basically buying domain names, optimizing for SEO, and then drop shipping. This is like before Amazon took over the internet. And so you could use a CMS, plug it into wholesalers. If you had a SEO optimized domain name, people would come to your landing page. They could place an order. You would have a merchant services account, i.e. be able to process a credit card payment. And then the wholesaler or the manufacturer would drop ship, and you could take like a little percentage. Okay, so that was my business. It was doing pretty well. We're selling all kinds of things, from garden seeds to a variety of household products. And then one day the bank called me. They froze my merchant services account, froze all my money. I said, this isn't even, what are you talking about? I used to think having a bank account was like a human right. But anyway, they froze my merchant services account. They did an investigation. It took 9 months. They froze all my money. I had nothing. Finally, they released my funds. They said I wasn't doing anything illegal, but I was doing things that were hurting their reputation. And on the basis of that, I lost my account and everything. And so in a panic, I started looking for alternatives. And what was a massive stress ball at the time turned into just incredible dumb luck, because I stumbled into Bitcoin like at the tail end of 2012. I got extremely obsessed immediately, moved to, well, actually, first I went to the Bitcoin conference 2013 in Amsterdam. Patrick Byrne, CEO of Overstock, was a speaker there. I met lots of Bitcoiners, realized there was BitDev meetups in New York. I went to New York. I met a guy named Nick Spanos, who was running the Bitcoin Center, a nonprofit right next to the New York Stock Exchange in Wall Street. I spent basically a year volunteering there, arguing with Wall Street bros, meeting lots of great people. I met Ethereum people, including founder of Consensus, and sort of got into Ethereum and spent the next 6 years from, I guess, 2015 to the end of 2020 intensely working on Ethereum and Consensus. After that, I happened to join Polygon, but it was still Matic. Mihailo was like my brother, a very good friend of mine. He was doing a lot of research in 2017 and 18, and I was like, oh my God, this L2 stuff, this could be something. And this will segue into the ZK stuff we're going to talk about in a second. But so basically just pure dumb luck really is how I got into this stuff. And then just after that, like obsessively following the tech as best as I could and riding the wave, I guess. So that's pretty much it, really.
Wow. I mean, you're so right. Like, so many people think of bank accounts as a basic human right. And I say, like, for 99% of the experience, that probably tends to be the case, right? We don't have too many issues. But then you look recently into the protests in Canada, everyone keeps bringing this up. It is possible to just turn off someone's bank account if you disagree with the government, if you disagree with the bank itself. And I think that has led to a lot of people really believing fundamentally in, say, the tenets of Bitcoin, for example, or other cryptocurrencies, and maybe some resistance as well to CBDCs more generally. But it's really interesting that you went in, as a lot of people do, into Bitcoin initially because of those properties, and then more into technology. You've mentioned a couple of things there: zero knowledge proof, and you mentioned layer twos. We do want to aim this episode towards zero knowledge proof, and that most of our listeners might not even know what that means. Could you give us a little bit of a background into what is zero knowledge tech?
Sure. So with blockchains, and by the way, I'm a Canadian, and I'm just totally embarrassed by what happened. And by the way, the Canadian court recently said what the government did was totally wrong. So even if it's totally wrong, they can still confiscate your bank account, which means that custody and self-sovereign identity and custody of your assets is a fundamental core tenet, I think, to being a sovereign individual, particularly in these kinds of scenarios where your assets or potentially your identity are threatened. And crypto assets do a very good job of that, obviously with public-private key pair infrastructure. But the thing is, the way the system is architected inherently has quite a number of limitations that generally translate into a very simple trade-off. Okay, it's the difference between convenience and security. So the more convenient something is, the less secure it is. If you've got your crypto on your phone and you're using a blockchain network that has one or two nodes, then you can easily fire around crypto at the speed of light for a very low cost. And that's a super convenient experience. It's obviously not very secure. And the extreme opposite, right? You keep your crypto in a vault, in a Swiss vault somewhere deep in a mountain, and you're only using Bitcoin. Well, you have to go and get those keys, and Bitcoin's still not going to be like super fast, although it's very secure. And so from that standpoint, you have these trade-offs. Now, how can you work within the margins, and what type of innovation exists to close the gaps so that you can continue to have properties and characteristics, particularly around security and privacy, without sacrificing performance, essentially? So ZK is an innovation that allows tremendous resilience, tremendous security, tremendous privacy, and it can potentially enhance performance significantly. And so, like a simple, I guess, analogy. So it's like, imagine you have a digital secret, like a password, right, or some personal information, and you need to prove to somebody else that you know it, but you don't want to actually reveal the secret or the password itself, right? So zero knowledge is a clever solution. It allows you to demonstrate the knowledge of the secret in a way that convinces others without giving away any details about the secret itself. And so if you can, for example, without revealing your password to a secure website, instead you could use zero knowledge proof to prove that you know the password by performing a series of, for example, calculations that only someone who knows the password could successfully complete. This way, the other person can have confidence that you know the password without actually learning what the password is. So that's a tremendous innovation that, of course, Bitcoin pioneers like Hal Finney and others have been working on for a very long time, Nick Szabo and others. But this technology, or this mathematics, is being implemented into blockchains right now, and it's reshaping the landscape of the entire ecosystem because we're sort of like on the cusp of like significant improvements in privacy, scalability, performance, all the good things that you don't necessarily want to trade off in order to have the benefits of what the blockchain can give you.
Yeah. And I think one of the examples that we've given in previous episodes, because we talk a lot about digital identity and self-sovereign identity, is that you need to prove you're over 18 to someone. They don't need all the information about you on your driver's license or on your passport to prove that you're over 18. All they need to really know is that your date of birth, when taken to the current date, shows that you're over 18. And that's an example of somewhere that you could use a zero knowledge proof. They also really need to kind of prove that corresponds to you as well. So there needs to be some kind of privacy preservation and actually proof that you're holding a secret there. But I think that's a really tangible use case that a lot of people can understand in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, so that's a great point. In the context of identity, you sort of have to rely on somebody else, i.e. the government, to prove your identity. What if you could establish your identity on chain, and now you have a canonical identity, and from that canonical identity, you have persona constructs that describe who you are in different contexts. And so, for example, you can have your gamer persona, and maybe your gamer persona has nothing to do with your banking KYC persona, for example. And so you can have attestations from others attesting to attributes that describe your gamer persona without revealing all this other information. And then you can have this notion of selective disclosure where, let's say you want to interact with a video game platform, you can selectively disclose some information related to your gaming persona, which is just a branch from your canonical identity, all of which you own and control because you have the private keys. And so imagine a world, an internet, where instead of all of your identity attributes and attestations residing within the Facebook box or the LinkedIn box or the Google box, which you don't own. Like, I've never gotten a check from Mark Zuckerberg. I wish he would send me a check because he's got a lot of money these days. And so whenever you take action that builds attestations and reputation around your identity within that box, they get to sell more advertising, you get nothing, and you don't really have any say in the privacy policy. ZK like inverts the model. And so you can imagine websites in the future, and even now really, where it's just like a QR code and you navigate, or I don't know, you connect with your MetaMask wallet or whatever, and that's how you browse the internet and you log into things by selectively disclosing some information.
I'm really glad you bring up that term, actually, selective disclosure, because I think you're really conveying one of the main benefits of zero knowledge technologies generally, right? We're saying the zero knowledge in the name is that we're giving away zero knowledge about some statement, but I'm still proving to you that it's true, like Alec's example with verifying age. And then that also minimizes how much information you're giving in different contexts. As you said, I think that's a really powerful way to think about it. So just to bring it back to the core of the technology then, about what zero knowledge tech is and what we're talking about in Web3 specifically, right? So my understanding, as I've seen it, is this concept, and again, it sounds a little bit like magic as well. So we've covered it in a previous episode. And, you know, if you hadn't heard that one, any listeners, then just take our word for it. These things do exist and they do work. To my knowledge, zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge technologies are used in two different contexts in Web3. So you have it being used at, let's say, layer 0 or layer 1. So basically your blockchain level for primarily scalability is my understanding. But then you also have it used more at the application layer as well, for general computation, for digital identity, that kind of thing we've been speaking about. So what's your view on that, John? Like, where do you see the role of zero knowledge and why do people use it in these two different contexts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's just go back to the identity example I used. If you establish your identity on chain in the original early Ethereum context, everything would be there for everyone to see. So even though you could have a canonical identity with persona constructs and you can have selective disclosure, granular authentication, depending on the use case, everybody can still see. And so from a privacy standpoint, at the protocol level, I think that's, like, in my opinion, probably the most important part. Another example is Energy Web Foundation. My buddy Ed Hess, he built this like incredibly powerful energy trading. And basically it's a virtual grid that emulates assets that are in a decentralized grid, like power generation, storage, and how EVs can come and pay for power, transport power, discharge their batteries. Basically, it simulates the grid. And so when you have these kinds of transactions, the regulatory requirements are that customer information cannot be disclosed except for to the regulator. And so in this kind of a context, this is more at the application layer, wherein you can have a transaction where perhaps some grid asset interacts with another grid asset, for example, to pay for power consumption, and it can transmit payment. And within that, there can be some information that's sensitive, like customer data, which nobody can see except for potentially the regulator, who may have the ability to unlock that transaction and take a look inside of it. So you can configure, depending on the context, at the application layer. At the protocol layer, I think the foundational element for me is really the privacy and offering the users the opportunity to selectively disclose whatever it is that they want to share. Obviously, that's a little bit of a contentious issue these days, and there's privacy pools which have been sanctioned, et cetera. So the politics of whether or not we'll have this as a right, I guess, are being worked out. But that's, I would say, one base layer sort of foundational element. Aside from that, security as well. And again, this goes to the protocol level. When you do have that kind of integrity in the system, it makes it very hard to have hacks like Equifax in America, where every single American's credit information is released. So enhancing security, I think, is another really important again, protocol layer component. And again, I tend to lean more towards the protocol utility because the application utility, there's a lot of different ways people can apply it. And then I would say also, of course, trustlessness, efficiency, scalability. And what's really interesting now is liquidity aggregation is an example of when you have this type of infrastructure where you can like securely in a trustless way, efficiently share data, essentially, then you can apply that to effectively sharing liquidity. And so you don't get these like siloed pockets of liquidity, which is one of the problems or challenges we face in Web3 today. And so at the protocol layer, if you have that, then at the application layer, you can build all kinds of really cool DeFi stuff that maybe takes advantage of that and finds better APY spreads or just better pricing, better execution, etc. So that's in my mind how I think about the difference between the protocol benefits and at the application layer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you've covered a lot of the main areas where I've seen zero knowledge proofs and technology used in Web3, right? I think another one is maybe in the proof of reserves area, right? I think that's a hot topic for lots of your stable coins and things like that. And now people are using these ever more clever ways of using zero knowledge technology to prove what reserves you have. And there are all sorts of different problems you can solve in that kind of proof of ownership of money, even if it's not for a stable coin. Maybe you want to prove how many assets you own to the government. Maybe you want to prove it's above a taxing threshold, but you don't necessarily need to give the exact amount to someone like your accountant or something like that. I'm just spitballing. So one thing I'm interested about, because I've also seen it used a lot in the idea of scalability, right? In the Ethereum and you said you came from the Polygon world as well. That's where we're seeing zero knowledge proof used for rollups. We've got ZK Sync now, which is a huge kind of protocol trying to improve how we use things like Ethereum and other blockchains. So, what's your view on the use of it for scalability, and also then how is it used for Telos specifically, right? Because I'm intrigued to know, is it being used more in the scalability area, or is it being used for like the applications that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with respect, so just going back to the example you gave, maybe you want to prove some assets without disclosing. I would say I certainly remember Occupy Wall Street, Bear Stearns. You look at the global derivative market, it's 700 trillion to 1.5 quadrillion. I don't think anyone really knows. And so the extent to which a large financial institution or actor or minority set of actors in some type of position requiring trust can actually prove they have the ability to settle in the event whatever triggers are met that would force the trade to go a certain way, without it being like a surprise that, oh, we don't have the billions of dollars we need to pay you, which then sets off this cascading wave of systematic failure. And so I imagine scenarios where even in traditional finance, you do need to be able to prove without necessarily disclosing certainly who owns the money, for example, which customers or in which segregated accounts, but you do have the capacity to pay. I think that would bring a tremendous amount of resilience into basically the largest, most speculative market in the world by far. And so those are the kinds of use cases I'm really excited for. In terms of scalability, I'll just say this. I love Ethereum very much, but we started off talking about the world computer. Okay. We didn't build a world computer. AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, that's the world computer. We built a global US dollar bank account, basically, system, and that's fine. I personally feel like the dollar proliferating around the world is good for the world, just being honest about it. But in the context of the world computer meme that came out at the start of Ethereum, we talked about sharding, for example, 1,024 shards. Yeah. And then it was like, okay, well, this is actually very hard, maybe 64 shards. And then I think in 2018, Vitalik quietly posted on his blog about like 1 shard. So scaling is very hard. It's very hard. The people who are working on this stuff are my heroes. I admire them tremendously. And I've worked with a lot of those people. It's like very hard. So, the extent to which we can create abstraction layers, i.e. L2s, whatever, L3, L4, L5, who knows where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's rollups, there's all sorts of innovation, there's data availability, etc. You can create these abstraction layers, and the extent to which you can get the abstraction layers to talk to each other in a fluid, dynamic way at a very large scale, because you can enable this trustlessness and this ability to talk to each other without revealing sensitive information that you otherwise would not want to share, but proving that you do have that sensitive information, which is good enough to satisfy trust levels. And then from there, you can have transactions with total confidence. Okay, that essentially enables this very large, what is otherwise disparate abstraction ecosystem to functionally interact, even cross-chain. And so it's like an elegant solution, I think, for getting the kind of performance that we need, particularly. And it's not really an issue until the mania returns, okay, after the halving, after about a year or two, and the spike comes and suddenly the gas prices are totally crazy and everyone's like really upset. It's at the margin when you need it. And of course, we're seeing consistent growth all the time. But I think, in my opinion, when the next tremendous wave of activity comes, it will be very sharp, very intense, and I think much more sustained, because this time around, I think a lot of AIs will be basically serving as autonomous agents on this large financial system. And the activity will ramp up tremendously, and it's at that margin where you need your transactions, you need the scalability to work so that your transactions don't cost you an arm and a leg. So that's how I think of it from a scalability standpoint. With respect to Telos itself, so generating proofs is expensive. It's also energy intensive, by the way. And we're coming up with this notion of multiple independent actors can contribute to aggregating many zero-knowledge proofs into a single proof that is more efficient to verify on-chain. And so decentralized proof aggregation, okay, it's the idea that generating and verifying ZK proofs, well, first of all, it is computationally demanding. Even efficient stuff like snarks, there's non-trivial costs, right? And that's like a hard problem, and it can be a bottleneck. And part of the way we're thinking about it is distribute and optimize the workload through a recursive proof aggregation. So basically, many different users submit a ZK proof to certain transactions or statements, right? And you can call that a base proof. And then a network of independent prover nodes take these base proofs and combine them through basically recursive compositions. So multiple base proofs get merged into aggregated proofs, and then that encapsulates the underlying proofs. And so basically you're aggregating thousands of underlying base proofs, and this aggregated approach we think can be faster and cheaper. And so basically the work of proof generation and aggregation gets crowdsourced to many prover nodes. And so it's really thinking about the bottleneck problem and how to distribute that. And lots of people have thought about different ways to aggregate and basically batch proofs, but that's essentially it's in a nutshell, without getting like super into the weeds of it, kind of the approach we're trying to take at Telos, and really focusing on this aggregated approach.
So one of the things, so we've been talking about, okay, so we think that we know that zero knowledge proofs and batching and ZK rollups can help with scalability issues, right? The cost of transactions, throughput, all of this on layer ones. But what you're also saying there is actually it's quite computationally intense to kind of set these things up on the layer twos to batch all these transactions into one giant zero knowledge proof that we can then relate back to the layer one. So right now it's a balancing act, it seems, of, okay, is the computational intensity of actually setting all these zero knowledge proofs up on the layer two worth what's actually being put on the layer one? And is that something that is defined right now, or is it still up in the air and we're still trying to work out actually is it more efficient or not?
I'm very old and skeptical. Okay. I'm like turning into a Republican already. Okay. So there's a lot of things I just am probably salty or suspicious about. The Ethereum World Computer meme, I believed it wholeheartedly. I was very young and naive at the time. There's lots and lots of ZK stuff happening right now and derivatives of that. And like, I don't know, maybe some of it is great. We'll see. I'm not so sure. I think and lots of this stuff we'll find out, like I said, at the margin when the tremendous demand comes, how it will perform. Likewise, if you implement a system incorrectly, a ZK system incorrectly, or you just do it wrong, you can get locked into something that's really hard to extricate yourself out of. Where I think this is ultimately going is I could imagine ZK as a service with a hardware component, an ASIC that's extremely efficient, that you just plug in and it starts basically doing your proofs for you. That's the holy grail. There's some really spectacular ZK research teams out there. I'm obviously predisposed to the Polygon team, and Hilo, Sandeep, those guys are like my brothers. I love them very much. They worked intensely with a group called Ponos, Ponos, technology, you should definitely talk to those guys. They're probably like, not to slight anyone, but these are probably like the most talented. They're just like super smart, incredible researchers at the cutting edge. But I think where it's going is aggregation is one theme that I think will win out, and ZK as a service with a hardware component, wherein in addition to the performance characteristics of doing the proofs and posting the proofs and the cost, the energy requirements are also like improved, and that will be the box that you buy and plug in and run.
Interesting.
We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go before we get there. The speed at which we get there might actually increase and intensify. We'll see. A lot of great approaches right now. I'm just not sure how much of it is like going to actually work out versus if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. I don't know. So we will see. It's very exciting. It's hard to parse. It's hard to parse through it all, but you know, it's happening. So that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you make that point, right? Because we should note that a lot of this is still experimental in a way, and it's interesting to me that Web3 and blockchain has been the vehicle for lots of this experimentation. Like the actual core techniques for zero knowledge proofs have been around for 20, 30 years now, but they're only being proliferated and tested and changed by what's happening in Web3, which is really interesting because there's so much demand for it in the realm of scalability, in the realm of the application layer, security, privacy preserving. I think there's so much going on, as you say, and it's now kind of competition of ideas. So just to summarize, so we can use these zero knowledge proofs and zero knowledge tech to, number one, to improve scalability of blockchains effectively by moving some of the computations and verifications away from the base layer blockchain to a higher layer, right? And there being a kind of proof system that connects the two, which is really fascinating. And again, take our word for it that this stuff does actually work. Go and watch the previous episode if you haven't. And then you can also use it in a number of really interesting ways. The application layer to prove statements about yourself, your digital identity, your bank account information, etc., without having to actually reveal any of the actual information. So you could prove a statement like, I have more than £10,000 in my bank account, without telling them actually you have 2 million, right? That's the kind of statement you might want to prove to someone if you were giving a loan or something. So yeah, I think it's such an exciting space. I'm curious, because we're coming to the end of the episode now, what are you most excited for in the next kind of near future, maybe 1 to 2 years out? What are you most excited to see in the space with ZK Tech and also for Telos generally?
Sure. So you mentioned it's been around for a long time. Here's a tweet. Hal Finney talking about it 25 years ago. Hal Finney is a hero of mine.
Yeah.
Just a tremendous guy, and his wife continues his legacy running Bitcoin, a great charity, contributing to ALS research in the name of Hal Finney. So yes, long time, Nick Szabo and these other people, they've been talking about this stuff. It's just when you introduce the incentive, with these tokens, which I'm not going to swear on your podcast, but a lot of people say SH exclamation point, whatever coins, but actually the incentive around basically the way the networks operate today has been driving all of this attention into this technology and into this realm. And so I think that's a tangible, measurable benefit that's just exploded. The ZK research is unbelievable these days. What am I most excited about? I mean, well, of course, first of all, I'm most excited about Bitcoin, to be perfectly honest. I just think that it's just so resilient, and we're making tremendous progress across the board. And all the L2 stuff and all the different things that people are trying to do, which I don't think will ultimately work, just shows how anti-fragile the system is. It's just very hard to change. It's elegant in its simplicity. It's like, if I wake up tomorrow morning, by the grace of God, 2 things will be true, right? Like, I'll see the sun and Bitcoin will be around. So I'm very excited about Bitcoin. As far as the broader Web3 ecosystem, of course, I'm excited about Telos. I still run my VC fund, so I'm excited about a lot of different projects. Superchain is an example, and Arcana and some of these other things. But specifically, as it relates to Telos, I think we've got a tremendous opportunity because there was no ICO, no pre-mine, no nothing. It started as this like weird EOS project, which is like since evolved and gone to EVM. I think I'm going to push it much more in the EVM direction. Lots of innovation on the ZK side, and just try to like compete and see if we can actually, at the peak, at the margin, when the mania returns, can we actually do 50,000 transactions per second and do them for less than 2 cents per transaction? That's kind of like the litmus test I'm excited for, and we'll see. But yeah, Bitcoin is definitely something I think about every day, in addition to Telos, of course.
I like that a lot because we often talk about how Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies that have come out. You mentioned coins. I think Jack can bleep that out if he wants to. I mean, the goal
More
was to
work
be
for me
these.
in the editing room, Alec. Come on.
I mean, the goal was to be these electronic cash systems, right? Peer-to-peer cash systems, and a lot of them, because of the scalability issues, don't live up to that. But I still see a paradigm in the future where they can act as cash and I can transact using Bitcoin, not paying these incredibly high transaction fees that take too long to get through sometimes. But yeah, John, this has been a really fascinating episode. At the end of all of these episodes, we bring guests on. We ask 2 standard questions. We'd love to see how the answers change between person and change across time. So if you're ready, I'll ask the first of these questions. In one sentence, what is Web3 to you?
Web3 is the evolution of the internet wherein self-sovereign identity can finally be realized by everyday average users.
Powerful. I've not heard that one before. I think that's our first focus on self-sovereign identity, which me and Jack are big proponents of. So that's a good one. I like that. And the second one is, if you could choose anybody on the planet today or from history to sit down and discuss Web3 with, who would it be and why?
Well, of course, Hal Finney is somebody I would have loved to have the opportunity to meet with. And probably everybody would say, or many people would say Hal Finney. But I would actually love to talk to Copernicus, because Copernicus observed the expansion and contraction of the monetary supply when the lord or the king of the realm would mint more gold coins or take them out of circulation. And that was like a key moment in monetary science history. And from there derived or evolved many other things that eventually led to tulip mania and fractional reserve banking, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought it was like a pivotal moment in monetary science history. I would have loved to have talked to Copernicus about Bitcoin. That would be kind of a trip.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it says everything you need to know about Bitcoin that you're talking about Hal Finney and Copernicus in the same answer. That's a beautiful way to end the show. John, it's been a real pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for sparing your time. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you may be, and you can join us next time to untangle a little more of Web3.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Untangling Web3, produced by Emma Camilleri.
Don't forget to send us your thoughts, questions, and comments on social media, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast provider to catch the next episode. See you next time to untangle a little bit more of Web3.
The views we express here are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers.